Hello, hello, Soulful Seekers. Welcome back to Trauma and Transcendence. Today, I've got a lovely guest. I know you're going to adore her as much as I do. We met at the Heartland Hypnosis Conference just last spring, and I want to say we've really enjoyed each other as colleagues ever since, and I can't wait to tell you all about her and for her to let you know what it is that she's offering and doing in this fun little realm of trauma, hypnosis, and transcendence. Meet the lovely Jodie Solberg. Welcome, Jodie.
Thank you so much, Amanda. It's so wonderful to be here, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
We have a wealth in common.
You.
I don't do addictions work, which is something you are specializing in with Cormac. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that, though?
Yeah, absolutely. I have been working in and around trauma since late 90s, about 1999, and I've been a hypnotherapist since 2001. And my specialties were always around things like trauma and generational cycles. And addiction definitely falls in that. I've worked with a lot of families around abuse and custody issues, as well as spent about 10 years working with people with drug and alcohol convictions. And so, from children to teens and after school programs and group homes to adults in the criminal justice system and dealing with the court system, I have a lot of extensive background in those areas. And so, in my private practice work and now in my training work with other practitioners, coaches, and counselors and hypnotherapists, I do talk about trauma informed and solution focused hypnotherapy so that we can be moving forward while also healing from the roots.
I love that. Thank you for explaining it so eloquently. And hopefully, my dear listeners, that is something that we'll get to dive in with Jodie and Cormac together in a future episode. So you caught a quick spoiler here first. But today, the reason I brought you on is because I was fascinated by your talk at Heartland this year. And I can't recall the title because memory is hard after 40 for some reason. But you really talked about your work with children, the SleepTalk method, which I can't wait to hear more about, and then also the generational cycles of trauma and how trauma can factor into raising children. So we were talking just earlier about what it's like co-parenting with someone who's had trauma or has a possible diagnosis and can be complicated in terms of parenting.
Yes. And that's why I was talking so much about those generational cycles. And in the talk that you came to at Heartland, I was talking about doing different kinds of pediatric hypnosis, but also inner child work, because those things stick with us. I've literally worked with people who were 3 and 73 who were dealing with the same types of challenges around trauma and attachment wounds and feelings of unworthiness and shame and all of these things that get really programmed in from such a young age, unfortunately, for a lot of people when we're just first forming our beliefs about ourselves and our relationships and our situations in the world around us. And so we did, like you said, give a little tiny spoiler of my work with my business partner, Cormac Colleran, around addiction and trauma. And often those things start really young in childhood and then they turn into these adult types of addictions. And so when we're working with children, like you said, whether there's a diagnosis or not, because often it can be undiagnosed, it can be unrecognized because it could be this, big event. So it could be something like abuse, or it could be transitions and separations like divorce, or a parent that has an addiction, or it could be just feeling like a child doesn't have a safe and secure place to go when they need comfort or they need assistance. I know I'll actually tell you one of Cormac's stories just because it sticks out in my mind when it comes to how those childhood wounds can further on. And it's basically he had a client come into him for smoking, which happens a lot as hypnotherapists, right? Stop smoking. But then a few months later, she came back and said, well, I'm still not smoking, but I'm eating a lot of sugar. I'm doing a lot of emotional eating. And when he dug deeper and went into that trauma, informed work in that space to try to help her pinpoint, what is it that is coming up for her? Because often I describe it as there's weeds that come up and we just try to mow them over. Then they'll pop up somewhere else. And then we try to mow them over. And we really need to get to that root. And so when they went to figure out what was that root cause, it was from childhood. And I think it's really important for us to be aware that, things that people almost don't even notice or say, oh, that's just not a big deal. You shouldn't care so much about that. You should just get over that. Things like that often are the things that stick with us as adults. And so what happened was that she had when she had a who had um, neurodivergence, and he had autism. Also, might have had some oppositional defiance, things of that nature, from what I had heard and understand. But he would often get violent with her. And what would happen is she saw that her parents had to spend so much time and attention on her brother that she had to take care of herself, is how she felt. And when she was 6, she fell out of a tree and, climbing the tree, just fell down, hurt herself. And what would a normal 6-year-old do? They would cry for their mom or dad, right? And expect someone to come and comfort and soothe them and bandage their wounds or whatever. But she realized at that point that nobody was going to come and help her.
And that's almost the same level of trauma as when we look at I'm having a hard time with the word, but when we look back at the orphanages in, say, like Russia, how some of those infants, they learned to stop crying because nobody was coming. So
Absolutely. And so, often those types of childhood wounds, we learn to cope in different ways. And at that time, she did end up basically going for the cookie jar. And she ended up gaining quite a bit of weight, even just, between the ages of 6 and 7. And then as an adult, our subconscious finds these coping strategies, these ways to soothe us or find a way to fill a need that isn't being met in another way. And so she ended up going with smoking as an adult. But then as soon as the smoking was taken away, she went back to eating sugar again. It's really something where it can be, what we like to call those big T traumas, but it can also be the little T traumas, or it can be a bigger deal for you than somebody else would judge. And often, again, we're raised to disconnect, to find outside validation, other means to soothe, and we'll neglect our needs in order to be able to fit in order to get approval that we need. And people get praised. And especially I find little girls get praised for being good girls, for being quiet, for not being a bother, for taking care of themselves. Oh, you're just, so easy to deal with. And so that carries into our relationships as adults. And it can be, something that becomes that trauma, sometimes for the things, yes, that shouldn't have happened that did, but sometimes the things that should have happened but didn't are the things that end up being the things that shift how we view ourselves and how we move through the world. And so I talked a little bit about those things in April. I also talked about how the different ages and stages of working with children are, and how impressionable and imprintable we are. We're wide open. Our subconscious minds are just like little sponges when we're children. And again, that's when all of those core beliefs are being formed, and we get to see what relationships are supposed to look like. And everyone around us is modeling that. Well, if you didn't have those healthy relationships modeled to you, then again, often you're seeking that approval you feel like you have to achieve, or you don't know what unconditional love and acceptance looks like. And so how can we give that to ourselves or anyone else when that's never been shown to us?
Right. So I guess that's the point where it becomes generational trauma.
Exactly. Those things get passed down because there's ways of either dealing and coping with things, or not dealing and coping with things, not processing and releasing, when we're dealing with emotions. If you were told things like, this is a little old school, but it definitely is something that I heard in life, kind of that stop crying, or we're going to give you something to cry about type of an attitude, whether it was you or it was your parents that were told that, and grandparents that were told that. And when you aren't allowed to have emotions, when it's not considered normal, when you're sent off into a corner to be by yourself because you're not allowed to be mad or sad or anything other than just however, not seen and not heard and just quiet, however they don't
Well,
want you.
sometimes the role is to be perfect, right? Be
Yeah, be
perfectly all
perfect,
right all the time.
perfectly even and all right all the time. But no one ever actually teaches how to regulate your emotions in most families, of, okay, well, it's okay to have emotion, high or low, and here's how you get yourself back to that nice, comfortable place. It's just that's not okay if are sad or mad or whatever the case may be. So you just shut down, disconnect, don't pay attention to those things, and then reach for something that's going to make you feel better. And so that can be anything. And especially in our world now, our fast paced world, often that's scrolling. And then we get into the world of comparison and distraction from, anything that can take us away from feeling our feelings and really, truly moving through things. We just stuff them and store them. And that's where I feel, a lot of the rise. I mean, there's a whole lot of factors in the world, of course. In our world, there's a lot that goes into this. But when we talk about chronic pain and health conditions and autoimmune conditions and so many things, especially that affect us as women, our minds and bodies aren't just connected, they're a whole as one. And so when we're stuffing and storing things in our subconscious minds, storing them in our bodies, because emotions are physiological responses that we just put words to, then what happens is we start to see the effects over time of that. It just accumulates. And then it either can cause or exacerbate issues that we have physically.
So when we're working with children, how is it different?
It's the same type of situation when you're working with a child or you're working with an adult, but children don't have all of that kind of critical analytical thinking ability just yet, depending on the age. It shifts as they get older. But again, that subconscious sponge of we have opportunities. Now, we never lose our neuroplasticity. We never lose our ability to change. We always have that. So there's never too late. And it's such an opportunity when you're working with children, again, to be able to shift those patterns, because we start to create patterns of thoughts and feelings and behaviors on the outside, but also on the inside. So again, what we think of as habits, and with children, they're just going to manifest in different ways. So we'll think of things more like nail biting or potty training issues, or picky eating, or, we think of those kinds of things attached with childhood. And yes, often they'll regress and, go back into those types of challenges, or have nervous habits, picking and different things. Whereas adults, again, we tend to, have more adult habits. And so it'll translate. And with children, it can definitely be things like sugar, and that can start early, and body image issues can start early. But then again, as adults, then those kinds of things translate more into the substances. And so you'll just see slightly different types of habits.
Mhm.
But we also have such an opportunity to, because they are so open and in their subconscious so much, to make those changes and to lay that as a foundation, so that again, they're not carrying those same things for decades. So I feel like it's just, you're in the building stages. It's like making a decision on changing the floor plan when you're building the house versus a remodel, right? You're in the middle of creating the blueprints and you're like, actually, I think I want to put this over here. Or, let's kind of shift how we're doing this, because this isn't working for us. It's not going to be functional. versus after the fact, then you're tearing things down and building them back up. And so it can absolutely always be done, but what an opportunity to do that as a child. And when you work with a child, the other thing that's really amazing, because always, whenever we work with anyone, we're not just affecting the one person, we're affecting everyone in their sphere. So when you're working with a family, when you're working with a child, how amazing is it that it's not just about them, it's about that whole family dynamic. And when that generation changes, then it's the next and the next. I actually am still connected. This, like I said, I can't believe I've been doing this for this long, to be honest. But I remember working with a group. I worked at a private school actually, and was doing counseling and teaching and things a long time ago. We're talking 20 years ago at this point. And I basically started with some of these kids and working with them. So whether they were going through, I remember one being abused by a cousin, or dealing with, family divorces, or I spoke Spanish. So I also always got sent all the kids that didn't speak English and were dealing with transitions from moving from other countries, for example. And that can be really traumatic too. And so
Culture shock is real.
shock. Yeah. And being put in a place where like you don't understand anyone. Yeah. It was really transitionally challenging for them. And so I was working with all these different kinds of kids. They were so little. They were like pre-K and kindergarten age. And now I'm still connected. The beauty of social media. Still connected with some of these families, 20 years later, and they are now having their own kids. And I've gotten to see, because I, was closer in age at the time to the parents. And so, I was able to stay connected, hear how their kids were doing, hear now how they're doing and their own marriages and having babies. And it's so amazing to see how well they're doing and these shifts and these challenges. Whereas, if I hadn't had a chance and then, they're 45 and coming to me, then, there's a lot that they're unraveling, because I often am working with parents who are saying, I want to do something different, but I don't know how. So they know they want to make the change, but they don't know what to do differently. Or they feel like, okay, I didn't want those things to come out of my mouth, but now I feel like I'm sounding just like this person or that person, and this is coming out. And they're also then dealing with the after effects versus being, so it's kind of being proactive versus reactive. They're dealing with the after effects of these childhood wounds playing out in patterns in their own relationships. So working with children is such a profound gift and opportunity. And they're so open. It's so easy, to be honest with you. Right? I think it's super fun. And it's so easy because they'll tell you, if you pay attention, if you listen and you know what to listen for, it will all come out in their play, in their narration, in their stories, in their art. Whatever expression that they're using, it comes out. They share with you everything that's going on behind the scenes. They'll play out the dynamics in the relationships. And so you don't have to, especially, younger children, under 12, let's say, 10 and down, especially. They don't need to close their eyes as a hypnotherapist. It's all just playing out in front of them. And so we have really great opportunities as parents, as practitioners, to be intentional and aware of what's going in for them, and then also of what's coming out, because you really can get a lot of insight just from taking the time to listen and observe.
Yeah, absolutely. Having been a parent and a parent in a difficult, non-standard situation, I can definitely think back to some times when we did actually take our kiddo to play therapy for some of those bigger transitions. And so I can definitely remember some of the play themes coming up as you were talking. And it's like, oh, yeah, I remember a lot of those things. And I wasn't trained in hypnosis at the time, so I wasn't as aware of the opportunity. unfortunately. So one of the things we had to deal with that was really challenging was trying to co-parent with someone who did not want to co-parent at all. And if anything, would often counter-parent anything that my spouse and I tried to put into place for our little one. I'm wondering, for people in those situations, how do you help them navigate that?
Great question. I've worked with a lot of families like that. And like I said, it can absolutely feel like that counter parenting, because not only does the parent who's being counter parented against need to be able to manage their own emotions and try not to engage as much as possible and try to stay neutral as much as they can, and things of that nature, because it is important as much as possible to, especially with the child. And I think this is important that people are aware that children hear everything way more than you think they do, even while they're sleeping.
They
So
see everything too.
they see everything, they hear everything. Yeah, you have to be really careful about that, of staying as neutral as you can. Because often, so if there's one parent where, let's say, there's a more narcissistic abusive ex, let's say, that they're trying to co-parent with, and that parent is probably saying all sorts of things negatively about this, situation, the family, the other parent, of trying to not engage in that kind of behavior. Because what can happen is children can absorb that, they can internalize that, because they come from both parents, and then they feel like there's something wrong with them, because often what's told is, well, you're just like your mom, or whatever it is. And then they're saying bad things about the mom or the dad or whoever that is.
I'm
Um,
so glad we never did that.
exactly. But
Wow.
to the other
That's hard.
parent sometimes is, and so, being in a situation where not only do you have to protect your child, but also protect yourself and your emotions, and deal with the trauma you've gone through if you're in that kind of a situation. But then you're also feeling like you're having to unravel all the damage that's done when they're with the other parent, or that everything good you're doing is being unraveled on their side. And so, it's really establishing, and this is what I try to help my clients do, is establishing their home as a place of safety, as a place of consistency, as a place of that unconditional love and acceptance, and fostering that secure attachment there as much as possible, because they can't control what's happening when their child's in that other home, in that other household. So consistent routines, consistent messages, again, building that child up, and letting them know that you have that unconditional love and acceptance, and that they can come to you. Because even if the other parent, let's say, is, saying all these awful things or whatever is happening, then you showing that consistency, you show your child who you are. Just be consistent in it as much as you can. And that's what you can control, is your response, not what the other person is doing. And so really working on intentionally responding versus emotionally reacting, and
Mhm.
regulating your own nervous system so that your child you look at you as a model and can co-regulate with you. I think, those are the key factors that I work on with people in those
Yeah.
situations.
And those are really big things. I think especially the consistency, and then having structure and not being afraid to have boundaries.
Yes.
And that was double-edged sometimes, because there
Yeah.
were times when we had boundaries, we had structures, and the other parent would automatically work against it. So if we praised manners, my kiddo would go over to his other parent's house, and all of a sudden it's, oh, you know what? We're going to eat with our fingers today, and we're not going to worry about. And this was a child who had a hard time with those things. So there's a reason we were working on, yes, we're going to use our utensils and our tools and our words properly, versus what was easy.
Yeah.
So the thing about the structures, I think, that really made it helpful for us was, even though we knew that after a while there was a cycle, the cycle would be Sunday, he would come home from a visit. We would count that day out, basically, because he would not be a well-functioning child.
These
He would
students,
be
yeah.
Transition day. And because he was on the spectrum and had undiagnosed trauma, transition day could lead into a couple of days sometimes. So we wouldn't have our typical little guy until school started maybe Monday afternoon. And that's if he didn't have a full on meltdown at school that day, depending on what had occurred over the weekend. And then we would have a pretty functioning, normal, easygoing house until there was a phone call Thursday evening. And then it would cascade into a series of behaviors, and it could go as far as bedwetting and emotional outbursts and aggression at school and difficult themes of play. And then it would be high anxiety until Friday afternoon when it would be transition time again.
Transition time. Yeah, and that's typically what you will see, like you said, more with children. So, those things are going to come out in one way or another. But with children, yeah, it is going to be the regression when it comes to potty training, bedwetting, behavior, those tantrums, like you said, aggression. Those are the things that you will see quite a bit, when children are exhibiting those types of behaviors from challenges that are going on internally. That's how they come out externally, which is different again with there's not that reasoning. We, even as adults, we can be so hard on ourselves and have those strong inner critics and everything, but there's that level. We have to put on the brave face. We have to, and kids can have that too sometimes.
Right.
We put
Absolutely.
on this, like, well, I can't get upset in front of anybody, so I'm just going to keep it all together until we blow up or break down. That can happen, but it takes a lot more for an adult than it does usually for a child. But there's a family that I'm working with where the little girl does that at school. So her meltdowns aren't necessarily when she's at school. She will hold it all together. She'll just seem the happiest child. And
Yeah.
then she gets home and it all comes out. And, it's important to, for your child, you got to know those transitions. You got to know, okay,
That's where the structure was key. It really gave us the opportunity of here's the day to learn something new versus today we're going to go super gentle and just be patient.
yeah,
Have no expectations today.
smooth some grace
Yeah.
and manage those expectations, because yeah, if you don't have those transition periods, people really need that in general, and kids especially. We need to give them notice of transitions, help them through the transitions, be able to walk them through that versus expecting them to be like little adults who can
Right.
just push through and get over it, so to speak. Now, again, quotes on that, because, even adults, that's not healthy and it's not the
Right.
best thing, but people put really high expectations on kids. I literally heard a story the other day where this little girl was like 5, maybe 6, and there was an adult that was telling her to stop acting like a child. It's like, wow, like, says helping her through, and it was a transition, and through, instead of helping her through that transition, she didn't want to wash her
Right.
hair and
Yeah.
go to bed, and so that's why it's so important. It's interesting because as children, think back, right? We have, even if we don't realize it, we have those solid structures and routines for a reason. So if you think about bedtime, right? That's a typical one you can think of for a child. It's like, okay, so you have dinner, you might have homework, whatever it is. It's like, brush your teeth, put your pajamas on, have some quiet time, read a book, whatever it is, and then lights out and you go to sleep. So there's a reason why we do that for children. And then we get older and then we stop doing those things. But we need those transitions. And I actually talked to a lot of families about this with the pandemic, because they now all of a
Lost
sudden
structure.
structure, they had no schedules, they didn't have transitions. There wasn't a, you walk out of the door and close the door behind you and go somewhere else to go to school and to go to work, things like that. And then you leave and you have the ride home, and that's a transition. And then you come back in the door and then it's home time, right? We didn't have that. Really difficult for a lot of people. So think about that with those transitions, to giving that to ourselves, giving that to our kids, of not just being like, okay, it's time to go from this activity to the next.
Mhm.
Let's give them a little notice. Would you let, and you can always give two acceptable options, right? It can be like, would you like to start to get ready in 10 minutes or 15 minutes? Or would you like to do this or would you like to do that?
My favorite was, would you like to have a bath or would you like to have a shower? It
Exactly.
didn't matter which one he
You know,
chose.
yeah, they're both acceptable options. Bathing was not an option, so we didn't give
That's
that
right.
option to
That's
bathe,
right.
but you just give two really great options, something you'll be
Mhm.
happy with, but
Yeah.
it helps them, because that is the other thing with children, is
Yes.
they do not have control over a lot. And so that's one of the
Right.
reasons why they regress when we're
Yeah.
talking about trauma or control issues and things like that, is that's what they can control. Things like their bowels. And
Yes.
so, and, if they are regressing like that, there's, usually there's underlying with habits, there's a lot of underlying anxiety, there will be fears or anxieties or trauma or whatever underneath the surface, but it'll come out in those ways because that's what they can control. So they'll say, no, I don't want to eat that. Or no, I don't want to go, potty in the bathroom. They'll just won't do it because they feel like they're out of control. And we know as adults that doesn't feel very good. And so we need to be able to give them acceptable choices so that then they feel like they're making a decision. And that can be really, really helpful as well. So transition times, giving them appropriate choices, and then modeling that healthy, regulation and processing of emotions. I think if
Yeah.
you can do those things for kids, it sets them up for their lives.
So as a parent, I didn't know this, but we had kind of ritualized things. We had rituals for on the way home of transition day. We had certain things we were going to do. What I didn't know was Hebb's law. What fires together wires together. I didn't know that every time we did that, I was creating neural pathways for him to readjust back into home. And now it makes so much sense. And it's like, God, I didn't have that training, but I was just lucky that it intuitively kind of fell in for us. And I was able to create little things. That's when I say that structure was really key for us, and the consistency, because then he could kind of find his grounding and his emotional regulation a little bit faster that way.
Yeah. Yeah. And so understanding how the brain works definitely makes a big difference with that, because we do have that ability, like I was saying, with that neuroplasticity, to change and create new neural pathways. And each time you do that ritual, you're reinforcing the positive path, the path that you want to reinforce. And so when we are really intentional about that, and intuitive is good, I always call it mommy radar, it could be daddy radar too. What are the things that work? And then keep doing those, right? What are those things that are going
It
to be?
could be simple things too. There were times when I would bring blankets in the car. He would always have a specific blanket pillow in the car, and I would usually just dab a couple of drops of lavender oil.
Absolutely.
Guilty.
Things, soothing, that there's nothing wrong with that. Absolutely. And then, because think about how strongly in the brain we associate smells, scents,
Yes.
right, with certain things. And so there's lots of ways that you can help them soothe that nervous system. Can be through your voice and your energy, can be through having that favorite blanket, that scent, that music, like whatever it is, that atmosphere of
We did a lot of singing in the car. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, and singing is amazing. So, when we're moving our jaws and singing, making those noises, right? All is really great for activating that vagus nerve, and bringing some of that calm and comfort in. And it can get a lot out. We can use our voices. Again, a lot of times kids' voices are shushed, and that can cause a lot of challenges when we become adults with being able to speak up or ask for what we need.
Absolutely. And so you've also had a different way of working with children, one that I'm not as familiar with. And so I was kind of entranced when I was hearing your talk and thinking, oh man, that was an option. Tell me a little bit more about Sleep Talk.
Absolutely. Yes, that was a big part of my presentation, because sleep talk to me is so valuable, because if I'm working with a child directly, I don't see them that often. If I am seeing them for an hour once a week, something like that, then that's that one snapshot of time. And yes, it can make an impact, absolutely. And who is with them the rest of the time? And so with Sleep Talk, it's a process where I'm teaching parents and empowering them to learn how to speak to their child's subconscious mind in a positive way that's going to instill unconditional love, self-esteem, secure attachment, all of these wonderful gifts that we want to give children. But by learning how to craft these messages and to speak into their mind in a positive way, we can unravel some of the past negative programming and instill more intentional positive messages, and to help lift them up versus tear them down. And so it's a really fantastic process. It's literally 2 to 3 minutes. And the reason why it's called Sleep Talk is it's not just for sleep and to help with sleep, but you can do it while they sleep, which parents really appreciate, because they're like, they won't do anything, they won't participate in that, they won't listen to me, they back talk, whatever it is, different ages and stages. But it's something where, yes, you can reinforce those messages while they're awake during the day, but you can while they're sleeping. And this could be literally any age. This could be at night. This could be in the morning. This could be over naps. You can do this with teenagers, young children. But what you're doing is you're crafting these messages. So I teach parents how to do this. And it's just all about, again, that unconditional love and acceptance and security and all these wonderful things. Well, they could absorb whatever's on the TV when they fall asleep, or you could turn that off and you could choose what's going in. And it's just speaking those positive messages. It takes 2 minutes, and it's consistency. You can do both parents, you can do it with all the children in the household. You can have other family members do this as well. We have lots of blended families in different situations, so it's adaptable for everyone, even military families, and doing things like remotely recording a message. So I've worked with lots of different kinds of families with this, but parents love it because they're empowered to be able to feel like they can do something to help their kids. And we do have the ability to customize the statements to specific challenges.
For those listeners that are not hypnotherapists, can you touch on what they could expect and why does it?
Yeah, absolutely. So we absorb everything. And again, especially children are that wide open, little subconscious sponge, but we absorb everything even while we're sleeping. But when we are sleeping, we go through different sleep cycles. So when we're talking about hypnosis, any kind of it's basically my super, super simple definition with hypnosis is relaxing on purpose for a positive purpose, because it's slowing down those brain wave states so that our subconscious mind is open. That's where our creativity, our imagination, our emotions, that programming all happens. And so when kids are, and people in general are falling asleep, so we start to slow down. So when we're wide awake, engaging, we're in beta. And kids don't actually go into that beta, which is a really pretty fast brainwave state, until they're a little bit older. And so they get closer to those preteen and teen years, and then they start to be in beta a little bit more. But we have alpha, which is a little bit lower and slower. So think about when you're reading a book, watching TV or a movie, like meditation, relaxing and play, things like that. There's a lot of alpha waves happening, and that's a great open space. But theta is even a little deeper. So a deeper relaxation. We're going to go from alpha to theta and hypnosis. But kids are often in that theta state. And then again, as they get older, then they're a little more alpha and theta, and then a little bit more beta sprinkled in. Babies are delta. That's our deep sleep. That's what we think of as deep dream sleep. Theta is where our dreams happen. So that's our REM sleep. So again, we can actually be having heightened focus and awareness in these states even when we're in these light states of sleep. So when we go to sleep at night, we go a little bit deeper and deeper until we get to that deep dreamless sleep. And then we come back up through the stages and then we go back down. And so we have these about 90-minute sleep cycles where we're kind of in and out, up and down. And with kids, same thing. So as they're falling asleep, there's a sweet spot for this. Okay. So the sweet spot for this is, when you go up to a child and you rub their little forehead, their hairline there. And if they are wide awake, they're not deep enough for that, right? They're like, "What are you doing?" And they get up and are wondering what's going on. If they are just kind of out for the count and don't move at all, they're in that kind of deep delta sleep. They don't even react. If they are kind of that alpha to theta, they're just maybe going to shift a little bit, and they're out. And so that's a great place where you can start to instill these messages. Now, again, you can do this while they're awake too. So you can absolutely do this when they're awake. I highly recommend it. Kids tend to wake up and be using the words from the statements. They'll start to repeat things because they heard them, and it's wonderful. But what you can expect at first, we have all that negative past programming that's still hanging out. And it doesn't go away right away. We're adding in the positive messages. We're creating some new pathways. And again, it's things about that unconditional love and acceptance. If they don't feel like they're unconditionally loved and accepted, there might be a little bit of cognitive dissonance happening there. There might be a little bit of push-pull happening in there. Then consistency is the key. And so you keep consistently putting those messages in there, and they begin to become accepted. And then those past negative programs start to dissolve. They start to fade away. They're not being used as much. And the new pathway is being used and being reinforced over and over again. So that's really kind of why it works. So you can only have one belief about something at a time. And whenever there's new learning, new programming happening, especially when it's positive, it always wins. And so it will overwrite that past negative programming. And so this is a consistency thing. So this is a program that I do with people, usually over the period of about 6 months, because we do an assessment of where is their child now. And that's with the parent, whoever it is, the caregiver who is wanting to do this with the child or children. And so we do an assessment where are they socially, emotionally, physically, relationships, all of those things. And so we do an assessment for that, and then we lay down the foundation. So we have a foundational statement that is more general, and then we give that time to be accepted. So we give that about 6 weeks to do its magic. And then we add to that, and then we have a transitional statement. So we add to that statement, and that's going to help a lot with any kinds of anxieties, because this works for just about everything you could possibly imagine. It could be, again, social, emotional, academic challenges, those habits that we talked about, anxieties, past traumas, different behaviors. And so we start to see the changes. So we do an assessment at each step of like, okay, what has improved and what are we still having challenges around? And then the third round is a custom statement. So then we see what's left over. And it's usually just one or two things that aren't, and we do an assessment of, literally from very poor, okay, good, very good, excellent, those types of things. So basically, we're looking for above the middle, above the bar there. And so we start to see things creep up and get better and better. And we see a percentage of change. And then whatever's left over, that core need, that's the root. Because often we're trying to treat symptoms versus a cause. And so we're looking for whatever that root is, and then we target that. And I teach parents the formula to do that. So once we've done that, they now have the tools in their toolbox to do that forever. So then they craft these statements later when something comes up with a bully at school or an academic issue or some other kind of challenge, something that's unforeseen in the future, they'll have that in their toolbox.
So for parents who are considering taking some kind of approach, they like the idea of this. How do they know if their child is a suitable candidate? Is there an age range that's preferred, or what guidelines might you have for them?
anybody could benefit from this. The parents will benefit from this, which is great. I worked with a family who, so the father was dealing with some depression and alcohol issues. The mother, behind closed doors, wasn't, super well known, and it wasn't super overt yet. The mother was dealing with some postpartum OCD. So a lot of anxieties and fears. And the son was a toddler. They were trying to do the potty training. He was having some challenges with that, starting to get some aggression. So they were starting to see some of the effects of the things that were going on at home with him. And just teaching them sleep talk taught them to speak all these messages into the little boy's subconscious mind. Well, guess what? The parents are hearing it too. It actually calmed and soothed the mother's fears and anxieties. And so, two things with that question. One is it literally can be any age. Now, because of the assessment, and we can do any age for sure, the assessment itself is going to have things about, verbalizing, so around speech and writing, or and it's at whatever their level is. Math for an 8-year-old is going to look different than math, like learning their numbers, for a 3 or 4-year-old, right? So I'm going to customize a little bit on there, but typically, when they start becoming verbal at like 2, let's say, all the way to 18. But I mean, it really could be, you have an adult child at home, if you have an adult parent at home, you could do this with anyone, because all you're doing is speaking.
That's so sweet
It's
to
true.
think of an adult parent.
Yeah. People are using sleep
Yeah.
talking with family members with health issues or dementia or anything, because it really is just speaking love to each other. And so you can speak kind, loving words to anyone. So people do have adult children or things that are at home. I wouldn't mind. Somebody asked me that once. Like, I wouldn't mind. With teenagers, typically the parents will stand at the doorway versus going right up to them because they may wake up. And I did have a teenage client who, I was working with her, but I was also working with the mom. And the mom learned how to do sleep talk, and she was doing it with all of the kids. But the mom told me, yeah, one night she woke up and she was like, "Mom, what are you doing?" And she was like, "I'm just telling you I love you. Good night." And that was it. It was super easy. And I'm like, my mom did that. I'd be fine with it. She lives here. It's fine. But what's really beautiful is it can work for any age. And so, yes, you could definitely start doing this with babies. I work with people who are also pregnant and postpartum too. So you can do this at any time. And honestly, there isn't really a contraindication to this, because it is just learning how to speak in a way where these messages can stick and be accepted, and that they really are supportive. So that's kind of the beauty of this.
I can really see the power of that, because as the parent is doing that, they're also anchoring into a specific state themselves. They're anchoring into that state of loving, unconditional parenting. So that actually is beneficial for them too when difficult times do arise. I can see why.
And I feel like that heals their own inner child, because often when I'm working with adults, a lot of it is reparenting themselves and giving themselves the things that they didn't get as children themselves. So they're teaching them, they're learning and teaching their child these things. They're also learning it for themselves, because again, what do? They come to us and they say, "I need help with my child. I don't know what to do." Now they're being empowered to where there's something they can do. They're learning how to do it, and they're healing those old generational wounds and traumas from the past, as well as affecting positively the generations to come. So to me, I feel like anybody could benefit from it. It's just a matter of whether or not they want to add this to the toolbox. Now, I believe in having a whole care team and having a holistic approach. So obviously, if it's a physical challenge of some kind, I work with a lot of people, if their kids have physical, health issues, or they do, then we want to make sure that they're being supported by the medical or physical health practitioners as well, and that they're getting taken care of on all levels. But this is something that can be supportive for that medical anxiety. It can be supportive for any kind of chronic pain or health conditions. It again, mind body connection is real and we're completely connected. And so being able to support on that mental emotional side is always a good thing. Even the CDC will tell you that at least 85% of physical health conditions have a psychological component. And so if they are saying that, we know it's at least that much. And I feel like this is something that can just be complementary to anything else, whatever parenting styles or whatever other support that they're getting. Often I've had that where I'm working with a family who they have a speech pathologist for the little boy because he was having, he had a tongue tie and he was having issues with speech. And we're just getting faster, even better results because they're helping to build his confidence and his abilities. And it's really been amazing to see the progress because of that. And he was a COVID baby. So that's also something that I didn't even realize that because he wasn't exposed to a lot of people, speech isn't just your physiology, it's also modeling and watching other people. And because he was really only around his mom, he didn't really get a lot of that. And then he also didn't have the confidence of being able to, use his voice and speak in public and interact with other adults and all of these things. So it's just been a really beautiful, eye-opening experience that, it can work for just about anyone.
And so if a family decides that they'd like to add that in their toolbox, typically how long do you work with them for?
So usually I do work with them for 6 months. I have a 6-month program and we can do that individually. I also have a course for that where they can go in. They're still going to get support from me and guidance. So it depends on if they want me to do individual sessions with them or their child as well. I can do that. But I have it set up where we can do the assessments where they can turn those in. They can also watch videos. So they get to choose their level of support on that. And then I have monthly coaching calls for that particular course, or they can work with me individually there. And so they can find that on my website. I know we'll put that here in the notes, and so they can check that out and learn more about it. And if they want to book a call to learn more and ask questions, they can do that there as well. And then, like I said, there's 3 stages within those 6 months. We do 3 different assessments. I teach them and walk them through all the steps. And then after that is really just implementing. And again, it's creating a ritual. Like you said, Amanda, it's creating a routine and a ritual. I help them with how to incorporate that into their existing routines so that it makes it easy. And again, it is so simple. It's amazing how profound the results are when it's as simple as it is, but it works on those same tenets and premises of what we do as hypnotherapists, just working with parents to empower them to have the skills to do that for their own children, not feeling like they have to go to someone else to quote unquote fix their child. It's like, guess what? I have something I can do. That is a game changer for parents. That helps them just boost their confidence and feel so empowered because they don't feel helpless or hopeless or like they're out of control.
And you have a resource for people who are interested as well. I think we were speaking, and it's how to speak to your child's subconscious mind. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I have a free download that helps them give them tips. So it's 5 different tips on how to speak into their child's subconscious mind for better results. So positive behaviors and, just having an overall calmer, more happy household is always a good thing. And so, yeah, so that one has some tips there. And so they'll be able to download that as well. And, I do, like you said, work directly with family and teach parents. I also teach practitioners as well. And so if someone's listening to this and they're, a hypnotherapist, they're a coach, they're a healer, they're an educator, anyone who's working with families or children or who works with adults who have children, because again, we're teaching the parents to be able to go back and do this with their kids. And that can be a big source of stress when there's a lot of challenges happening at home. And so if anyone's interested in learning about that, then I also would invite them to reach out to me directly. I can share more about the Sleep Talk course to become certified in that as practitioner. And then, of course, as you mentioned with Cormac, I also have with our SFTI Hypnosis Academy, solution focused and trauma informed hypnotherapy courses. And we do have more coming up around trauma, as well as generational cycles of things like addiction and anxiety and things coming up in 2026. We have, I know our trauma and addiction training is going to be held in January, and then we have more courses to come. And so would love for anyone to reach out if they're interested in learning more about that as well. Because, I really feel like when we can impact a family, again, it's so far reaching, we'll never know how far that goes. There's such a huge ripple effect, and it is such incredibly rewarding work. And so,
well, if generational trauma can happen, so can generational healing.
Exactly. And so I love what you're doing here with Trauma and Transcendence. I think it's so beautiful. And I appreciate you so much for having me here today.
Thank you so much for being here. It's always a pleasure when I get to learn more about you and the work that you do. It's incredible. So, Soulful Seekers, I will put in as much information as I can about Jodie for you into the description so that you can find her and her beautiful work. And as always, stay happy, stay healthy, but most of all, stay inspired. Bye for now.